it works best in a really big market, really big TAM, where that TAM is comprised of lots of units, lots of customers. Like if my TAM is massive, but there's only 100 customers for my software product, not a good product-led growth setup. If I could acquire 100,000 customers, that's a good product-led growth setup. Because if you just think about the rate limiter on acquiring them, well, if I'm going traditionally with just sellers, the rate limiter is how quickly can I hire sellers? How effectively can I on-ramp? Like all that sort of stuff. And so you're kind of limiting your rate of growth into that TAM by a human capital constraint. I think there's some ingredients of the product, that are better fit for product-led growth. If I'm selling kind of a general ledger or a single sort of like big HR management system, it's such a carefully considered system by a small group of decision makers that you don't really need product-led growth for that. Now you could kind of lower friction for consideration, get maybe a product-led lead or a product-led lead generator, but you're not going to really kind of land and acquire those customers for a really considered choice. I think we had the advantage early on of a very cynical user persona in a developer, and so you see a lot of product-led growth kind of business model building around developer tools, because developers are self-sufficient. They kind of know what they want. They're skeptical of products that need to be explained to them if they can't kind of use it. Probably the salesperson is going to be less technical than they will. So what value do they really get? Just like get me into the product, let me use it. If it does what I need to do, the product can do a good job of kind of explaining itself. But I don't need another human being to explain it to me. I'll figure it out on my own. And so that persona is sort of like naturally more wired for product-led growth. I think products with built-in network effects, some dimension of virality or, collaborative capability, like Figma as an example. It's sort of like one person's going to bring it in, but I'm going to kind of light it up and turn it on for, the next 100 to 1,000 people in my organization. And that kind of product-led expansion model feeds in maybe to an opportunity for sales to transact or convert a larger expansion opportunity because the product has sort of like earned it. Those are some of the ingredients. And then, naturally, I think if you pricing, not just price transparency, but absolute price is kind of a factor. I mean, we chose to price effectively just above free. And by design, we priced below the 10K kind of formal purchase requisition workflow that exists in most companies, where I've got to go get my boss's sign off and approval, and I got to think about sort of, is the budget here? Do I need to go argue for it? Below 10K or probably 15K today, most people can just on a discretionary basis just sign up for something and spend it. When you get above that, there's just some human navigation that you need to do. And I think if you're priced at hundreds of thousands or several hundreds of thousands or millions, like you probably need some more solution selling. You need to explain, like, is it really worth it? Like, can I translate the problems that you're experiencing with the value that my product is going to bring? That's actually like true value selling. And that is, you're not going to find a lot of that in product-led growth. And so I think it's a combination of all of those things that sort of yields the ability to build a model. But I will say, last thing is, like, there are some trade-offs. Like Atlassian was never really the famous triple, double grower, where you're tripling.
By the way, I'll interrupt you for a second. My first couple months at Battery, Neeraj Agarwal, who was my boss at the time, wrote this framework, and we tried to come up with what we were going to call it. And it's funny because now it's just like become triple, double, T2D3.
Yeah.
And it's like spread in the industry, and no one really knows the root of it. But it was like my first month on the job, and we were like, should it be 2T, 3D? And we were like debating and I feel like it's actually rotted some people's brains about, like, this is the only way to grow a company. And I feel I was 1% like in it. I just helped come up with the moniker. But it's just funny. Everyone followed this, like, this is the gold standard of how you have to build enterprise software companies is T2D3. And Atlassian's a perfect example of, like, no, you don't.
We didn't. And, but by the way, it was by design. Like we had all these tense debates kind of internally around, not intentionally constraining our growth, but like the way that we were designing our business model and the way we were designing how we were acquiring market share and growing into our market made it almost impossible to grow faster than 60%. We were just like, we would have to do different things to do that. We understand what those are. Part of it would be we could have earlier tilted our pricing curve and gone after like the Fortune 1000 or the Fortune 500 with, you know, with ASPs or ACVs in the multi-hundred thousands to millions. We chose not to do that. So we're like, without that, we're probably going to grow between 40 and 60%, and that's actually okay. And so I think, you know, in some cases, like you're choosing slower growth at kind of a small base, potentially for a more durable long. I mean, what's remarkable about Atlassian is it grew between 35 and 50% for like 15 straight years,
which compounds a lot of value.
It does, a huge amount of value. And you know, we always used to use, even though it may not be a fair example, but we kind of pulled 15 years of historical growth in Amazon. Like Amazon's growth for the first 15 years looked remarkably similar to Atlassian. So this is pre-AWS, where all of a sudden it was like just the adrenaline shot that just like, you know, like makes everything kind of look wonky. But you know, the argument that we were trying to make is like, you can be a durable compounder that just predictably grows every year between these bands. And like, how does that add up? And by the way, what are the other trade-offs is like, we were just such a capital efficient business, right? We were profitable. And so like we were compounding, you know, like cash in our own bank account every year. Like we were just sort of building without dilution, you know, and you know, like we could fund anything that we wanted to do eventually. And that's just a very different business. It's a very different way to build a business, but it also yields a very different
There's
business.
a natural rate of absorption in a market for a lot of companies, right? And there's also like some elements of prisoner's dilemma of what your competitors are doing.
Yep.
And Uber versus Lyft, a great example of sometimes you have to play the game on the field with all of that. But like if you don't, you can control your own destiny at the pace of what the market's willing to take. And also if there's someone out there trying to go after this.
Although I'll tell you, we zigged where others zagged, and it's the hardest thing to do because, like, I remember all this sort of existential angst internally, where there were companies now that are lost to history, Rally Software that went public. They ripped by us. You know, we were growing at 50%. They're doubling year over year because we're selling single digit tens of thousands of deals to big enterprise customers, and they're doing, you know, single digit $1 million deals. And so you looked at it and you're like, man, are we making the wrong choice? Jive was another that kind of ripped by us and went public.
Jive, I remember lost to history, but at one point it was like the highest trading public SaaS company. It was trading at like 30 times revenue or something at a time that was wild.
Fog Creek was another. I mean, there was a bunch. And you looked at all of them and they all had what would be very typical business models, right? Like high price software, enterprise sales reps that, you know, like you didn't quote the price. You kind of went, knocked on the door. You had these value discussions. You tried to sell top down. You tried to get as much, you know, you tried to get as much as you possibly could at that initial point of sale. And then, by the way, hope that adoption and customer success teams caught up, you know, with what you'd sold. So you didn't have kind of a renewal or retention problem on the other side of that. And it was nerve-wracking to see those companies grow at twice our rate. We went exactly the opposite way. We're like, we're going to do something very different. We're going to build a business model that we think over the long term, you know, will work against competition, and ended up in our particular category working.